The stars looked the same as they always had, but Captain Jake Morrison knew that was about to change forever. He stood on the bridge of his ship, the Earth defense ship Defiance. Watching the giant alien vessel appear in space near Earth, the ship was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. It looked like it was made of liquid metal that moved and changed shape as he watched. Jake had read all the reports from other worlds. The pattern was always the same. The aliens would arrive, send their fear message into the minds of everyone on the planet, and within hours the whole world would surrender. It had happened to 43 different species across the galaxy. Not one had ever fought back. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrians. They looked like walking crystals, tall and thin, with bodies that glowed with strange light. For 300 years they had moved from star to star, planet to planet, offering the same deal to everyone they met: submit to their rule or die. Every single species had chosen to submit. "Sir, we're getting their message now," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun.
Oh.
Her hands shook slightly as she worked. "The controls." Jake nodded. He had been waiting for this moment since the first reports reached Earth 6 months ago. The Zephyrians were coming, and Earth was next on their list. But Jake had a feeling this time would be different. Humans were different. "Put it on the main screen," Jake ordered. The image of a Zephyrian appeared on the screen. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with a body that looked like it was made of blue-white crystal. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind blowing through broken glass. "People of Earth," the alien said, "we are the Zephyrian Empire. We rule this galaxy. You will surrender to us now, or we will destroy your world. You have 1 hour to decide." The message ended, but Jake knew what was coming next. The reports from other worlds all mentioned the same thing. After the surrender demand, the Zephyrians would send their fear weapon. It was something that got inside your head and made you so afraid that you could not think or move or fight. Every species that had faced it had been completely helpless. "All hands prepare for psychic attack," Jake announced over the ship's communication system. "Remember what we learned in training? Fear's just another enemy, and we know how to fight." Enemies. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was made up of men and women from all over Earth. There was Amy Rodriguez from Mexico, Tom Parker from England, Lisa Wong from China, and Danny O'Brien from Ireland. They all looked nervous, but none of them looked ready to give up. The fear hit them like a wave of ice water. Jake felt it trying to get into his mind, telling him that he was going to die, that resistance was impossible, that he should just give up and surrender. For a moment, the fear was so strong he could barely breathe. But then something strange happened. Instead of taking over his mind, the fear seemed to bounce off something inside him. Jake had felt fear before. Every human had. Fear of heights, fear of the dark, fear of death. But humans had learned to live with fear, to use it, to make it work for them instead of against them. "Status report," Jake called out, his voice steady. "All systems normal, sir," reported Tom Parker from the weapons station. Whatever they just did, it didn't work. Around the bridge, Jake saw his crew checking their stations. They all looked shaken, but they were all still working. The fear weapon that had defeated 43 different species had failed against humans. "Communications. Send a reply to the Zephyrians," Jake ordered. Amy looked up at him with surprise. "Should I tell them, sir?" Jake smiled grimly. "Tell them Earth does not surrender." In space, the Zephyrian ship seemed to pause as if the aliens inside could not believe what they had just heard. For 300 years, no one had ever said no to them. Every species had felt their fear weapon and immediately given up. But these humans were still here, still fighting. Admiral Zekthar stared at his instruments in confusion. The fear projection had been at full power. It should have broken the will of every living thing on the planet. But the human ships were still moving, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. "How is this possible?" Zekthar asked his officers. His crystalline body pulsed with confused energy. "Unknown," Admiral replied, his second-in-command. "Our psychological weapons appear to have no effect on these creatures." On Earth, President Helen Carter was meeting with her military advisors. The news from space was spreading quickly. For the first time in galactic history, someone had said no to the Zephyrians. "Madam President," said General Marcus Webb, "our ships are reporting that the alien fear weapon did not work on our crews. They felt it, but it did not stop them from fighting." Dr. Lisa Chen, head of the government's Alien Studies Department, was studying the data from the encounter. "I think I understand what happened," she said. "The Zephyrians use fear as a weapon because they assume all species react to fear the same way they do. But humans are different. We evolved with fear. We learned to use it to survive." President Carter looked out the window at the sky. Somewhere up there, human ships were facing an enemy that had conquered the entire galaxy, but they were not backing down. "Send word to all our forces," she ordered. "We do not surrender. We do not give up. We are human, and we will fight." First battle between humans and Zephyrians lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 3 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed, and the rest had pulled back to a safe distance. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Zephyrian Empire had been forced to retreat. News of the battle spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On worlds that had been under Zephyrian rule for decades, people whispered in amazement. Someone had fought back. Someone had won. The humans had done the impossible. Admiral Zekthar sent a message back to the Zephyrian homeworld. "We have encountered a species that resists our fear projection. Request instructions on how to proceed." Reply came back quickly. "Impossible. All species submit to fear. Increase power and try again." But Jake Morrison and his crew were ready for the second attack. They had learned something important in that first battle. The Zephyrians had become so used to easy victories that they had forgotten how to really fight. They relied on their fear weapons so much that they had no backup plan when it failed. "All stations prepare for round 2, Jake announced. "We get angry, and we fight back." The second battle was about to begin, and for the first time in galactic history, the outcome was not certain. The age of easy conquest was ending, and the age of human resistance had begun. Admiral Zekthar floated in his command chamber, his crystalline body pulsing with colors that showed his deep confusion. Around him, other Zephyrian officers worked at stations made of the same living crystal material. The bridge of their massive ship looked more like the inside of a cave than anything humans would recognize as a starship. "Report," Zekthar commanded, his voice making sounds like breaking glass. Commander Villanos approached, his smaller crystal form glowing dim blue with worry. "Admiral, we have studied the humans for 3 days now. Our fear projection continues to fail against them. They appear to process terror in a completely different way than any species we have encountered." Zekthar's form flashed angry red. "Impossible. Fear is universal. All living things flee from death. All intelligent beings surrender when faced with certain destruction." "That is what we believed, Admiral," Villanos replied carefully. "Humans seem to use fear as fuel for their fighting spirit. When we project terror into their minds, they become more dangerous, not less." On Earth, President Helen Carter sat in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the White House. The room was filled with military officers, scientists, and advisors from around the world. Everyone looked tired. The war with the Zephyrians had been going on for 3 weeks now, and Earth was holding its own, but just barely. "Status report," President Carter asked. General Marcus Webb stepped forward. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes. "Madam President, our forces have engaged the enemy in 17 separate battles. We have won 12, lost 3, and the other 2 were draws." "The aliens seem confused by our tactics." Dr. Lisa Chen raised her hand. She was a small woman with thick glasses who had become the world's leading expert on Zephyrian psychology in just 3 weeks. "Madam President, I believe I understand why the aliens are having trouble with us. They have built their entire empire on one simple idea, that all intelligent life will surrender when faced with overwhelming fear." "But we don't," said Carter. "Exactly," Dr. Chen replied. "Humans evolved differently than the Zephyrians. We were both hunters and prey animals. We learned to use fear to survive. When a human feels afraid, it makes us more alert, stronger, faster. Fear helps us fight better, not worse. In space, Captain Jake Morrison was leading a small fleet of human ships toward a Zephyrian supply base. His ship, the Defiance, had become famous throughout the galaxy as the first vessel to defeat a Zephyrian attack. Now Jake found himself promoted to Admiral and given command of Earth's best fighting ships. Admiral called Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. "We're getting strange signals from the Zephyrian base ahead. It looks like they're trying to send their fear weapon at maximum power." Jake smiled. Over the past 3 weeks, he had learned to recognize the feeling of a Zephyrian psychic attack. It felt like ice water in his veins and a voice in his head telling him to run away. But instead of running, Jake had learned to use that feeling to focus his mind. "All ships, prepare for psychic assault," Jake announced over the radio. "Remember? You're training. Fear is just information. It tells us we're in danger, and when we're in danger, we fight." The fear wave hit the human fleet like a hammer. Every person on every ship felt the terror trying to take over their minds. But the humans had been training for this. They had learned exercises to control their fear, to channel it, to make it work for them. On the bridge of the Defiance, Jake felt the familiar cold touch of alien fear in his mind. But instead of freezing him, it made him think more clearly. His heart beat faster, pumping more blood to his muscles. His senses became sharper. The fear made him ready for battle. "Target their main weapon," Jake ordered. "Fire when ready." The human ships attacked the Zephyrian base with a fury that surprised even them. Aliens had expected the fear weapon to stop the assault, but instead, it seemed to make the humans fight harder. Back on the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Zekthar received reports from the battle that made no sense to him. "The humans destroyed the supply base in 8 minutes, reported his communications officer. "Our fear projections seem to make them more effective, not less." Zekthar's crystalline form turned dark purple with confusion. "This cannot be correct. Fear stops all resistance. Fear makes enemies surrender. This is the way of the universe." "Perhaps not for these humans, Admiral," suggested Villanos. "Our scientists have been studying their behavior patterns. They appear to have evolved in a way that makes fear useful to them rather than paralyzing." On Earth, the news of the successful attack on the Zephyrian supply base spread quickly. But more important than the military victory was what it represented. For 300 years, no species had been able to resist Zephyrian conquest. Now, humans were not just resisting, they were winning. Dr. Paul Turner, a psychologist working with the military, was studying reports from human soldiers who had faced Zephyrian attacks. "What we're seeing is remarkable," he told a meeting of Earth's leaders. "The Zephyrian fear weapon actually makes our people perform better in combat. Heart rate increases, reflexes improve, thinking becomes more focused. They've weaponized something that makes us stronger." President Carter listened to the report with interest. "So you're saying that their greatest weapon is useless against us?" "More than useless," Dr. Turner replied. "It's actually helpful to us. When they try to make us afraid, we become better soldiers." The implications were enormous. If humans could not be controlled by fear, then the foundation of the Zephyrian Empire was worthless against them. But there was something else happening. Something even more important. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. On worlds that had been under Zephyrian rule for decades, people were talking about the humans who would not surrender. The news traveled through secret communication networks, whispered conversations, coded messages. On the planet Alteria, former Fleet Admiral Cassandra sat in her small apartment, reading a message that had been smuggled to her by the Resistance. Movement. The message was simple but powerful. Humanity fights. Humanity wins. Resistance is possible. Cassandra remembered the day her people had surrendered to the Zephyrians. The fear weapon had hit their fleet, and within minutes every ship had stopped fighting. The terror had been so complete that her people had never even considered resistance. But now, reading about humans who felt the same fear and kept fighting anyway, Cassandra began to wonder. What if surrender was not the only choice? What if the fear weapon was not as powerful as everyone believed? Similar thoughts were occurring to beings on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. The Kepler Collective, a hive-minded species that had surrendered without firing a shot, began to experience something they had never felt before: doubt about their decision to give up. On the warrior world of Rigel, clan leaders who had laid down their weapons in shame now wondered if they had acted too quickly. If these small, weak-looking humans could resist, why couldn't they? Admiral Zekthar received intelligence reports about these stirrings of unrest throughout his empire. The human resistance is having an effect beyond their own world, his intelligence chief reported. Subject species are beginning to question their surrender. For the first time in his long life, Zekthar felt something his species rarely experienced: uncertainty. The humans had done more than just resist conquest. They had shown the galaxy that resistance was possible, and that knowledge was spreading like a virus through his empire. Double the fear projections on all occupied worlds, Zekthar ordered. Remind them why they surrendered in the first place. But even as he gave the order, Zekthar knew it might not work. The humans had broken something fundamental about Zephyrian rule. They had proven that fear was not absolute, that surrender was not inevitable. The galaxy was beginning to wake up from 3 centuries of terror, and it was all because one stubborn species refused to be afraid. The message arrived on Alteria Prime in the middle of the night cycle. Former Fleet Admiral Cassandra stared at the small communication device hidden in her apartment wall. She had not seen one of these secret transmitters in over 20 years. Not since the Zephyrians had conquered her world and banned all military communication. The message was short, but it made her blue-scaled hands shake with excitement. From Earth Defense Command to all former military personnel, humanity stands. Resistance is possible. Will you stand with us? Attached to the message were tactical reports that seemed impossible to believe. Human forces had not just fought the Zephyrians, they had won multiple battles. The fear weapon that had broken every species in the galaxy had failed. Completely against these strange bipedal creatures, Cassandra remembered the day her people had surrendered. She had been commanding the Altarian fleet when the Zephyrian ships appeared. The fear projection had hit her mind like a physical blow, filling her with such terror that she could barely think. Within 2 hours, she had ordered her entire fleet to stand down. Her proud warrior people had not fired a single shot in their own defense. But now, reading about humans who felt the same fear and kept fighting, Cassandra began to feel something she had not experienced in decades. Hope, 3 star systems away. On the industrial world of Kepler 7, something unprecedented was happening. The Kepler Collective had always been a hive mind, millions of individual beings connected by shared thoughts and common purpose. When the Zephyrians had arrived 50 years ago, the Collective had made the decision to surrender as one unified voice. But now, individual Kepler units were beginning to think independently. Worker Unit 7749, Alpha paused in its duties at the mining facility and accessed the forbidden communication networks. The message from Earth was spreading through the Collective like a virus, causing individual units to question their shared decision to give up. Query: if small human species can resist Zephyrian control, why cannot Kepler Collective resist? 7749 Alpha transmitted to nearby units. The question spread from unit to unit, creating the first crack in the hive mind's unity in over a century. For the first time since their surrender, individual Kepler units began to think for themselves, instead of following the collective will on Earth. Admiral Jake Morrison was dealing with a problem he had never expected: too many volunteers. His small command center was flooded with communication requests from beings all across the galaxy. Former military officers, resistance fighters, even ordinary citizens were asking the same question. How do we fight back? Admiral reported. Commander Betty Stone, his new intelligence officer. We're receiving over 300 messages per day from 17 different star systems. They all want to know how to resist Zephyrian control. Jake studied the galactic map on his screen. Red dots marked worlds under Zephyrian control, while green dots showed free human territory. But now, there were yellow dots appearing, marking worlds where resistance movements were starting to form. What are they asking for specifically? Jake asked. Military advisors, weapons, tactical training, Betty replied, but mostly they want to know how we overcame the fear weapon. They think if they can learn our methods, they might be able to fight back too. Dr. Lisa Chen had been working around the clock to understand exactly why humans were immune to Zephyrian fear projection. Her research had become the most important scientific project on Earth because the answer might help other species resist. As well, the key is in how fear developed in different species, she explained to a gathering of Earth's leaders. The Zephyrians evolved as prey animals. To them, fear means absolute danger, a signal to freeze or flee. But humans evolved as both predators and prey. We learned to use fear as a tool to become more effective hunters and fighters. President Helen Carter leaned forward in her chair. Can other species learn to think about fear the way we do? That's what we're trying to find out, Dr. Chen replied. I've been working with alien psychologists who have managed to reach Earth. Some species may be able to retrain their fear responses, but it will take time and practice. The first test came when a small group of Altarian refugees arrived at the human colony on Mars. They had escaped their homeworld in stolen ships, desperate to join the human resistance. Among them was former Admiral Cassandra, now thin and scarred from years of hiding from Zephyrian security forces. We want to fight, she told Jake Morrison when they met. But we need to learn how to resist their fear weapon first. Jake looked at the alien woman standing before him. She was tall and thin, with blue scales and large eyes that had seen too much suffering. But there was determination in her voice that reminded him of his own crew. We'll teach you everything we know, Jake promised. I have to warn you. It's not easy. Learning to control fear takes practice. The training program was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in galactic history. Human psychologists worked with alien volunteers, teaching them meditation techniques, breathing exercises, and mental conditioning methods that humans had developed over thousands of years of evolution. The first breakthrough came when Cassandra successfully resisted a low-level fear projection during a training exercise. The artificial fear signal created by captured Zephyrian equipment hit her mind with the familiar paralyzing terror. But instead of freezing, she used the human techniques to channel the fear into focus and determination. I felt it, she gasped after the test, her scales shimmering with excitement. I felt the fear, but I did not let it control me. Word of the successful training spread quickly through the hidden resistance networks. If an Altarian could learn to resist the fear weapon, maybe others could too. On the prison world of Vega Minor, a group of political prisoners received a coded message hidden in their food supplies. The message contained detailed instructions on human fear resistance techniques. Within days, they were secretly practicing the exercises in their cells. The effect was immediate and dramatic. When Zephyrian guards tried to control the prisoners with fear projections, they found that their weapon was becoming less effective. Some prisoners were able to resist completely, while others found they could think clearly even while feeling afraid. The prison guards reported the unusual behavior to their superiors, who sent the information up the chain of command. Soon, Admiral Zekthar was reading reports of resistance training on dozens of worlds throughout his empire. This is spreading too quickly, he told his staff. The humans have created something more dangerous than weapons or ships. They have created hope. Commander Villano studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. Admiral, our fear projections are losing effectiveness on multiple worlds. The subject populations are learning human resistance techniques. Zekthar's crystalline form pulsed with angry red light. Then we must eliminate the source of this infection. Prepare the fleet for full assault on the human homeworld. If we destroy Earth, perhaps the other species will remember why they surrendered in the first place. But on 17 different worlds, in hidden bases and secret meeting places, former military officers and resistance fighters were preparing for something that had not happened in 300 years. Coordinated rebellion against Zephyrian rule. The galaxy was changing. The age of easy conquest was ending, and species that had forgotten how to fight were beginning to remember. The humans had done more than just resist the Zephyrians. They had shown everyone that resistance was possible, and they had shared the knowledge of how to do it. Admiral Jake Morrison received a message from Cassandra, who had returned to her home system to organize the Altarian resistance. The fire of freedom spreads, she wrote. Soon, the Zephyrians will face enemies on every world they thought they controlled. Jake smiled as he read the message. The humans had started something they could not control, and that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The Zephyrians had ruled through fear for 3 centuries. But fear was no longer absolute. The rebellion had begun, and it was spreading like wildfire through the stars. The secret meeting took place in an asteroid field between 3 star systems. Ships from dozens of different worlds had gathered in the hidden location, their crews risking everything to attend what would become the most important gathering. In galactic history, Admiral Jake Morrison floated in the zero gravity of the meeting chamber. Looking at representatives from species he had only read about in old Earth books, there were the blue-scaled Altarians, the insect-like Kepler units, the proud Rigel warriors with their ceremonial battle scars, and many others. All of them had one thing in common. They were tired of living under Zephyrian rule. Friends, Jake began, his words being translated into hundreds of different languages. 6 months ago, most of you had never heard of humans. Today we gather as equals in the fight for freedom. Former Admiral Cassandra stood to address the crowd. Her blue scales showed the scars of her escape from Altaria, but her voice was strong. The humans have given us something we thought was lost forever, she said. They have shown us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. The alliance they formed that day was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They called it the Alliance of the Unbroken, and its purpose was simple: to free every world from Zephyrian control. But their first mission was not a military attack. Instead, they planned something that would shake the foundation of the Zephyrian Empire, a galaxy-wide broadcast that would reach every occupied world at the same time, Captain. Sarah Mitchell had volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission. Her new ship, the Invisible Hand, was built using human stealth technology combined with alien engineering. Her crew included humans, Altarians, reformed Kepler units, and even some Rigel warriors who had abandoned their clan's surrender. Remember, Sarah told her mixed-species team as they prepared to infiltrate a major Zephyrian communication relay? We're not just planting transmitters, we're planting hope. The operation required precision timing. Teams would have to simultaneously attack communication stations on 47 different worlds, plant broadcasting devices, and escape before Zephyrian forces could respond. If even one team failed, the entire plan could be discovered. Sarah's team reached their target first, a massive communication tower on the planet Zarian that relayed messages across an entire sector of the galaxy. The tower was heavily guarded, but the guards were used to dealing with terrified populations who would never dare to attack Zephyrian installations. Phase 1 complete, whispered Kevin Walsh, the team's human demolitions expert, as he finished placing the broadcasting device. The transmitter is in position. Across the galaxy, similar operations were taking place. On Kepler 7, Worker Unit 7749 Alpha had convinced dozens of other units to help sabotage their world's communication hub. On Rigel Prime, warrior clans that had been enemies for generations worked together to strike at Zephyrian targets. The moment arrived at exactly 1400 Standard Galactic Time. Across 47 worlds, the hidden transmitters activated simultaneously, overriding Zephyrian communication networks with a simple but powerful message. The message was broadcast in every known language. On occupied worlds throughout the galaxy, beings heard these words: "This is the Alliance of the Unbroken. We are humans, Altarians, Kepler, Rigel, and many others. We fight for freedom. Resistance is possible. You are not alone. Rise up." Effect was immediate and dramatic. On world after world, populations that had been quiet for decades suddenly erupted in rebellion. The Zephyrian communication networks were flooded with reports of uprising, sabotage, and mass demonstrations. Admiral Zekthar stood in his command center watching as red warning lights flashed across the galactic map. "Report," he demanded. "Sir," his communications officer said, his crystalline form flickering with panic. "We have confirmed rebellions on 47 worlds. Zephyrian installations are under attack. Local security forces are requesting immediate reinforcement." Stared at the display in disbelief. In 300 years of conquest, nothing like this had ever happened. Individual worlds had occasionally produced small resistance movements, but never had multiple species coordinated attacks across the entire galaxy. How is this possible? He asked. The human infection has spread further than we calculated, replied Intelligence Director Zenthera. They have been secretly training other species in fear resistance techniques. Our psychological weapons are losing effectiveness across multiple worlds. On Earth, President Helen Carter watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy with amazement. The plan had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Not only were the target worlds rising up, but the rebellion was spreading to planets that had not even been part of the original operation. Madame President, reported General Marcus Webb, we're receiving requests for military support from resistance movements on over 200 worlds. The entire galaxy appears to be in revolt. The success brought new challenges. The Alliance fleet, commanded by Admiral Jake Morrison, was suddenly responsible for coordinating military operations across hundreds of star systems. Human ships were sent to provide support for worlds that had successfully overthrown their Zephyrian garrisons, while alien volunteers helped evacuate populations from worlds where the rebellion had failed. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. A small Zephyrian ship approached the Alliance base at Sanctuary Asteroid, broadcasting a message that shocked everyone who heard it. This is Subcommander Arkfell of the Zephyrian fleet, the transmission said. I request permission to speak. With human leadership, I have information that may help your cause. Jake Morrison was suspicious when the young Zephyrian was brought before him. Arkfell was smaller than most of his species, his crystalline body glowing with nervous blue light. But there was something in his voice that reminded Jake of the determination he had heard from other species who wanted to join the resistance. Why? Should we trust you? Jake asked. Because I have seen what my people have become, Arkfell replied. We were not always conquerors. Long ago, the Zephyrians were a peaceful species, but we learned to use fear as a weapon, and it changed us. We forgot how to live without making others afraid. Arkfell had brought more than just information. He had brought other Zephyrian defectors, young officers who were tired of ruling through terror. More importantly, he had brought technical data. About Zephyrian fear projection technology, Dr. Paul Turner, working with Dr. Lisa Chen, studied the alien technology with fascination. This explains everything, he told Jake. The Zephyrians have been using artificial fear enhancement for so long that they've forgotten how to function without it. They're actually more dependent on fear than the species they conquer. The information led to a breakthrough that changed everything. Working with Arkfell and other Zephyrian defectors, human scientists developed a way to reverse the fear projection technology. Instead of creating terror, the modified devices could broadcast feelings of courage and determination. We can do more than just resist their fear weapon, Dr. Turner explained excitedly. We can turn it against them. We can broadcast courage to entire worlds at once. The first test of the courage broadcast came during the liberation of Vega Minor. Alliance forces, led by Captain Sarah Mitchell, approached the heavily defended prison world where political prisoners from dozens of species were held. All ships, prepare for courage projection, Sarah announced as her fleet engaged the Zephyrian defenders. The modified broadcast hit both Alliance and Zephyrian forces simultaneously. Alliance crews felt their determination strengthen, their fear fade away. But for the Zephyrians, who had never learned to cope with courage, the effect was devastating. Faced with an emotion they did not understand, many Zephyrian ships simply stopped fighting. The prison world was liberated in less than 4 hours, with minimal casualties on either side. More importantly, thousands of political prisoners were freed, including leaders and military officers who immediately joined the Alliance cause. General Rick Barnes, now coordinating Alliance military operations from Sanctuary Asteroid, received reports that seemed too good to be true. Admiral, he told Jake Morrison, 17 Zephyrian garrison forces have surrendered in the past week. They're saying they don't want to fight anymore. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone had imagined possible. The Zephyrian Empire, built on 3 centuries of fear and submission, was crumbling as species after species rediscovered their courage. But Admiral Zekthar was not ready to give up. As reports of defeats and defections poured in, He made a desperate decision that would lead to the final confrontation between the Alliance and the Zephyrian Empire. "Prepare the Great Fleet," he ordered. "We will end this rebellion by destroying Earth itself. If we cannot rule through fear, then we will rule through destruction." The stage was set for the final battle, not just for Earth, but for the future of galactic civilization. The Great Fleet of the Zephyrian Empire gathered in the darkness between stars. Admiral Zekthar had called together every warship his people possessed, over 3,000 vessels of war. It was the largest military force assembled in galactic history, and it had one purpose: to destroy Earth and end the human rebellion once and for all. "This ends now," Zekthar announced to his fleet commanders. "We will show the galaxy what happens to those who refuse to surrender. We will make Earth an example that will be remembered for 1,000 years." But Zekthar did not know that his plans had already been discovered. Arkfell, the young Zephyrian defector, had friends still serving in the Empire's fleet. Secret messages had reached the Alliance, warning them of the coming attack. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Earth defense ship Defiance, watching as the largest fleet in human history prepared for battle. Ships from dozens of worlds had come to defend Earth. Altarian cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Kepler collective ships moved in perfect formation with reformed Rigel fighters. Even some Zephyrian defectors had joined the Alliance fleet. "Admiral," reported Commander Betty Stone, "long-range sensors show the Zephyrian fleet approaching. 3,000 ships, sir. They'll be here in 6 hours. Jake nodded calmly. The numbers were overwhelming, but the Alliance had something the Zephyrians did not expect: unity, courage, and the new technology that could turn fear into strength. "Send word to all ships," Jake ordered. "Prepare for the final battle today. We fight not just for Earth, but for the freedom of every being in the galaxy." On Earth, President Helen Carter addressed the world from the Emergency Command Center. Her words were broadcast not just to Earth, but to every allied world in the galaxy. "Citizens of Earth and friends across the stars," she began, "the enemy comes with overwhelming force, hoping to break our will through fear. But we have learned something in these past months. We have learned that courage is stronger than fear, that hope is stronger than despair, and that freedom is worth any price." The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. The massive force spread out in attack formation, their crystalline ships gleaming like deadly jewels against the black of space. At the center of the formation was Zekthar's flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon. "Begin maximum fear projection," Zekthar commanded. "Let them feel the terror of their approaching death." The fear wave that erupted from the Zephyrian fleet was the strongest ever created. It was designed to break the will of every living thing in the solar system, to make resistance impossible through pure psychological force. But the Alliance was ready. Dr. Paul Turner and Dr. Lisa Chen had worked with Arkfell and other Zephyrian defectors to create something revolutionary. A device that could not only block fear projection, but turn it into its opposite. "All ships activate courage amplifiers," Jake announced as the fear wave approached. The modified broadcasting stations that had been secretly placed throughout the solar system came online simultaneously. The Zephyrian fear projection hit the devices and was transformed, converted from terror into determination, from despair into hope. The effect on the Alliance fleet was immediate and dramatic. Every crew member felt their courage strengthen and their resolve harden. Fear still existed, but it no longer controlled them. Dead, it made them fight harder. But for the Zephyrian forces, the effect was devastating. The transformed projection hit their minds like a physical blow. For 3 centuries, they had known only how to create and use fear. They had never learned to deal with true courage, and when it flooded their consciousness, many simply could not function. "What is happening?" Zekthar demanded as reports flooded in from across his fleet. "Why are our ships not responding to orders?" "Admiral," his tactical officer reported in a shaking voice, "the fear projection has been reversed somehow. Our crews are experiencing emotions they do not understand. Many ships have stopped responding to commands." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Alliance fleet, outnumbered 3-1, fought with a fury and determination that amazed even themselves. Human ships used tactics learned from studying every species in the Alliance. Militarian vessels provided covering fire for Kepler Collective ships. Rigel warriors flew suicide runs against Zephyrian command vessels. Captain Sarah Mitchell, commanding the stealth ship Invisible Hand, led a strike force deep into the Zephyrian formation. Her target was Zekthar's flagship itself. "Remember," she told her mixed crew of humans and aliens, "we're not just fighting for victory. We're fighting for the right of every species to choose their own destiny." The Invisible Hand penetrated the flagship's defenses and delivered a boarding party directly to the command center. Sarah led the team personally, fighting through corridors filled with confused and frightened Zephyrian defenders. When they reached the bridge, they found Admiral Zektar alone, his crystalline form dim and flickering with uncertainty. "Surrender," Sarah demanded, her weapon trained on the alien commander. Zektar looked at her with something like wonder. "You feel no fear," he said. "Even now, facing death, you feel no fear. How is this possible?" "I feel fear," Sarah replied, "but I don't let it control me. That's what makes us different." The surrender of Admiral Zektar marked the end of the Zephyrian Empire's military resistance. But the real transformation came in the hours and days that followed, as the courage projection continued to spread throughout the galaxy. On world after world, Zephyrian garrison forces simply laid down their weapons. They had never learned to cope with courage, and when it filled their minds, they found they no longer wanted to rule through fear. But more importantly, Zephyrian people themselves began to change. Arkvel worked with Dr. Turner to broadcast modified courage signals to Zephyrian civilian populations for the first time in centuries. Ordinary Zephyrians began to experience emotions other than fear and the desire to control others. "It is remarkable," Arkvel told Jake Morrison, as they watched Zephyrian ships joining the Alliance fleet. "My people had forgotten what it felt like to hope, to dream, to want something other than power over others." The new galactic government that emerged from the war was based on principles that had never existed before. The Galactic Charter of Freedom, written by representatives from over 50 species, contained a simple but revolutionary idea. No being could be forced to surrender their freedom through fear, intimidation, or force. President Helen Carter, now serving as the first president of the Galactic Alliance, often reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. Humans had started the resistance not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they had learned to live with fear instead of being controlled by it. Admiral Jake Morrison, now retired but serving as an advisor to the new government, was frequently asked the same question by historians and students. How did such a small species change the entire galaxy? His answer was always the same. "We didn't change the galaxy. We just reminded it what it had forgotten." Every species had the capacity for courage. It just needed someone to show them it was possible. The former Zephyrian worlds became some of the strongest supporters of the new galactic order. Free from their dependence on fear as a tool of control, the Zephyrians proved to be natural scientists and explorers. Many of them joined Alliance ships as they explored new regions of space, searching for other species that might need to learn that surrender was not inevitable. Years later, when new species were discovered and invited to join the Galactic Alliance, they would often ask about the Great War that had freed the galaxy from tyranny. The story they heard was simple but powerful. Once there was an empire that ruled through fear, and everyone surrendered to them. Everyone except humans. And the humans taught the galaxy that courage was a choice, not a gift. The age of galactic tyranny was over. The age of galactic freedom had begun. And at its heart was a simple truth that humanity had shared with the stars. Fear was just another emotion, and it did not have to control anyone who chose to be free. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.